This Precision Report Writer 2 webinar is going to look at how to create 3 different types of PRW requests: crosstabs, summaries, and label requests. And we're also going to look at how you can import and export entire requests to and from the Precision Report Writer. I'm Ellen Gillis, your trainer this morning. In the previous PRW webinar, we looked at how you create a detail request, and we created one using the wizard and we created one not using the wizard. So today we're going to look at the 3 other types of requests you can create in the Precision Report Writer. So to enter PRW, I'm going to come down to the School menu, School Management Reports, and Precision Report Writer Designer Mode. I'll click OK through the 2 screens I get there. The first type of request we're going to look at today is the summary request. A summary request lets you group records and also summarize the information that you're showing and also calculate based on that information. So in my Precision Report Writer, I'm going to come to the folder I created in our last webinar, appropriately titled webinar, so that these reports and requests that we're working with in the webinars are contained in the same place. We see the 2 requests that we created in the last webinar, and what I'm going to do is create a new request, and this time we'll look at the features you have available to you in summary requests. So I'm going to click on the new button up here in the toolbar. When you first start creating a request, this is when you have the opportunity to indicate what type of request it is. So on this screen, I make the designation that I want to create a summary request, and I'll simply click OK. I'm going to show you 2 different types of summary requests, and this first one, I'm going to be pulling information about ethnicity, grade level, and gender, and show you how we can very easily get counts based on that information. So I'll just name this ethnic and call it ethnic counts. Now when I come to the data items in a summary request, you'll notice a difference. First of all, as usual, I have my list of available fields listed here in the left-hand table, but underneath that I have options that I did not have when I created a detail request. And you can see that all of these options have to do with some sort of calculation, either a sum or an average, finding a minimum or maximum, or doing a count of records in a particular group. Now the buttons you have available to you will depend on what type of field you're selecting, what type of data item you're selecting. And based on the information that's contained in that data item, the system knows what kind of calculations can be done with that information. So when I have an item highlighted, such as the number of days a student was absent, I have all of these options available to me. If I come down to a field like ethnicity, you'll notice that because that contains a designation as to what the student's race or ethnicity is, the only option available to me is a count of, how many students are a particular ethnicity. So the options that you have available at the bottom of the list of data items will vary based on what data item it is you select. Now in this particular request, I am interested in ethnicity, so I'll double click on the ethnic field. I'm also going to select grade level, and just remember from what we talked about in the last webinar that when you're in this list of data items, you can type the first letter of the data item you're looking for, and it will take you to that part of the list. If you're really quick, if I type GR really quickly, it'll take me to that part of the list as well. So I'm going to select grade level. In this case, I want to select grade level from the EMF or student master table. And I'll double click on that. And I also want to include gender in these counts. So I've selected the 3 pieces of information I'm interested in, and I'm also going to click on the count of records and groups so that the request itself will do that counting for me. So I'll click on the button for count of records and group, and you see it gets added to the list of data items, and I'll click OK. Now, if you attended the last webinar, you know that I like to preview these reports every step of the way just to make sure I have the data that I intend. So at this point, I'll click on Preview. And you'll see that, remember, I didn't select anything that would indicate a student's name, but what I'm getting is different ethnic codes, different grade levels, broken down male and female, and how many students meet all 3 of these criteria. So I have one student who has an ethnic code of 1 who's a 9th grade female. I have one other student who has an ethnic code of 1 who's a 9th grade male. I have 2 students who have an ethnic code of 1 who are 12th grade females. So it's breaking down the information for me that way. To make the information a bit more usable on the screen, I'm going to come to the Sort and Group area, and with ethnic highlighted, I'm going to click on the Group button here so that the report will group by ethnicity. And when I preview that, now I have one ethnic group grouped together. I can see the grade levels and genders and how many students fit each of those different combinations, as well as a total for the entire ethnic group. So what I'm basically doing here is taking 3 pieces of information and getting counts of how many students fit different combinations. So that's one way that you could use a summary report. And in this case, again, I didn't ask for any student names or anything. I was just interested in counts for the school as a whole. So I'm going to close out of that request, and I'm going to create another summary request, and this one will include student-specific information. This next request I'm going to do is going to give me counts of attendance codes that students have been assigned. So I'll click on New. Again, I want to select that this will be a summary report, and I'll click OK. And this one is going to give me attendance counts. And I'll go to my data items. Now, in this one, I'm only going to select a few data items. One of the items will be the student name. I'm going to select the combined name field that's only available to us in Precision Report Writer. In this case, I want the students listed with their last name first. I also want the attendance codes that students have been assigned. Now, we talked in the last webinar about how one of the more challenging features of Precision Report Writer is knowing what the data items are called in MMS. You know what information you want to display. Figuring out what that information is called in MMS can be a little more challenging. For the attendance code that students have been assigned, I want to use the data item called SAF_code. And remember that when you're creating a request and you're not using the wizard, when you have a field highlighted, you can look up here at the top of the screen to see what table it's coming from and what piece of information it includes. So this is coming from the student attendance table, and it includes the student's attendance code. So I'll double click on that. And I'm also interested in the counts of the various attendance codes for each student, so I'll click on the Count of Records and Group button. I'll click OK here, and I'll preview at this point just to make sure that I got student names and attendance codes. And you can see that I did. Now I currently have multiple listings for most students because they've been assigned different attendance codes. So you can see that for Amy, it's telling me how many times she's had an absent code assigned, how many times she's had a suspension code, and how many times she's had a tardy code. To organize this a bit more, I'm going to come to the Sort and Group button. And just like we did in the previous request, I'm simply going to group on the student name. So with that highlighted, I'll click on Group, and we'll preview to see what result that has. So now you can see that the information is broken out for us by student, and I'll see how many times they've received these various attendance codes. But then when I group in a summary request, the system will automatically total those numbers for me for each student. I haven't made any designation that I want the system to do that, but because I'm in a summary request, it'll do that automatically. So I'm seeing not only how many times they've been assigned these individual attendance codes, I'm also getting a count of how many total attendance codes they've been assigned. Now, one feature that's available to you in the summary requests is in the filter area. When I click on Filter and Add, we saw in the PRW1 webinar that in the filter you can limit the information that you're viewing by adding filter criteria. When you're creating a summary request, one of the items you can filter on is actually the count of records in the group. So if I wanted to limit the information I'm seeing on this report and tell the system that I'm only interested in students who have 5 or more of any given attendance code, I can actually filter on the counts that are being done in the summary request. So in this case, I'll leave the count of records in group selected. In the relationship drop-down, I have quite a few choices. I could say I'm only interested in students who have a count equal to an exact number, or less than or equal to, more than or equal to, or more than, as well as some other options. In this example, I'm interested in students who have more than or exactly 5 attendance codes. So I'll select more than or equal to, and for the value, I'll enter 5. Remember that when you're setting up a filter criteria, once you've entered the information in the value box, you want to hit the Enter key on your keyboard, and that will make the OK button available to you. I can click OK, and when I preview now, you can see I have a more condensed list, and what I'm being shown are the students who have 5 or more of a particular attendance code. So the only code we see for Amy is that absent code, because that's the one she has 5 or more of. So a summary request will do some of these calculations automatically for you. You'll be able to include counts on the report very easily, and if you group on a certain piece of information, the report will not only show you the counts, but also total up the results for each group. And as we've just seen, in a summary request, you can filter on that count. To give yourself additional flexibility, if we go back to the filter area and highlight that criteria we have for the counts and click on Edit, remember that we have the Ask at Runtime option, which would mean that every time the report runs, it will ask us what count limit we're looking for, and so we can vary this based on what we're looking for. If we leave the 5 in place in the value, when the report runs, it will show us a 5, but we can change that if we want. So I'm going to leave the 5 in place. I'm going to check off the option to Ask at Runtime. I'll click OK and preview this. And I get the prompt that's asking me, what lower limit are you looking for? And I can leave it at 5 if I want and click OK, or I could bump that number up and see just the students who meet that criteria. So you can filter on the counts in a summary report, and you can add the Ask at Runtime option that would give you flexibility every time you run the report. You also, of course, in the filter could add filter criteria on any of the other information you included on the report. So if I added an option, I could say that I'm only interested in the attendance code of absence, for instance, and further limit the information that's being shown. So a filter in a summary report, you have all the filtering ability you had in the detail request with the addition of being able to filter on those counts. Okay. So those are 2 examples of summary reports that you can run. Also, as we mentioned in the last webinar, if you look at any of the examples in the other folders that are here, you might notice that some of them are summary requests. Let's see if we have any here. Yep. And so in the discipline examples, when you see under type, when you see summary, then that you know that that's a summary report, and you can take a look at that to see what information is being displayed and get some ideas for different types of reports you could set up using the summary feature. Okay, the next type of request we're going to look at is a label request. In PRW, you can create your own labels, and they certainly could be mailing labels like you have available to you in the main MMS program. We have the mailing labels available in Biographical. But what's nice about the labels in Precision Report Writer is that you have a great deal of flexibility as to what's included on the labels. So you're not limited to just creating mailing labels. I've seen plenty of schools who use PRW to create labels that they might put on folders that might just include the student name and year of grad or ID number. So you have a great deal of flexibility with the labels in PRW. So I'm going to come to New, and this time I'll select the option to create a label and click OK. Now, if it's the first time that you've created a label in PRW, you'll get this prompt that asks you what type of label you're going to be using. What's important here is this designation in the center of the screen. This is indicating how many columns the sheet of labels includes. And it's currently set to 1, so you might not recognize a lot of the options available to you up here. So typically, you change this to 3 columns, and then you see options that are more familiar. So change the designation in the center of the screen to represent the number of columns your label pages have, and then select the type of label size you're going to be using. Now again, this will only pop up if it's the first time labels have been created in Precision Report Writer at your school or district. If this is not the first time that a label's been created, as soon as you click on New and select Labels and click OK, this is the screen that you'll get. Now you'll notice it's very similar to the setup screens that we've seen previously. It's just this part that's going to show us the data items we select looks a little different. So I'm just going to give this a name. And when I click on data items, we're going to have a different view than we've had in the previous 2 types of requests. You'll notice that this time the available data items are listed on the right, and down below we have a series of lines so that we can indicate which line we want the various pieces of information to display on. We also have in the upper left-hand corner an area where you can change the type of label that you're using. So what you're going to see here is whatever was selected when someone came in and set up the first set of labels in PRW. But if you need to change that label size, you can click on Choose. Again, remember to make sure that the number indicating the columns is correct here, and you can change which type of label you're using. There's an option here where we can indent on each line so that the information is displayed a bit further over to the right, and then we can select our data items. Now it is important to make sure that you have the correct line highlighted down here at the bottom. You simply click on which line you want the information to display on, and then select your data items for that line. For this particular label, I'm going to do one that you might use for folders. So I'm going to include the student name and ID and year of grad. So I'll first do name. And as before, I simply double-click to select a data item, and it will be included on the line I've designated. Okay. And we'll see up here where it shows up on the label. Now, if I wanted to do ID number on the same line as the name, what I would want to do before I selected the ID number field is add some spaces after the student's name. So as I click on the space button here, take a look at what happens to the dots that are listed on the line where I have the student name, and you'll notice that each time I click on the space button, those lines move over, those dots move over a bit. I can then select the student's ID number, and I want this to come from the EMF table. So I can double click on that, or this select button that you see here does the same thing as double clicking. It will add that item to the line you've designated. If you decide you don't want an item there, you can click remove and it will be taken off the label. So let me come down here to a different line, and let's include the ID number there. I'll add some spaces, and I'll include the year of grad. Now, another thing you can do on the labels is you can add text that will show up for everybody on the labels that get printed for them. So if I click on the text button, I'll get a screen where I can enter, that I want the label year of grad, and I can click OK. I also have a few punctuation buttons here, so I can add punctuation to a line. I'll add a few more spaces, and then I'll choose the year of grad designation or data item and include that. Let me click OK and preview this just to make sure we get the information we want. Okay, so I can see that I have the student names, ID numbers, and year of grad. Currently not in a very useful order, so I'm going to go back to the setup screen, and we have the same options that we've had on the other types of requests. I can come to sort and group, and I could decide to put the students in order by last name. And if I preview that, they'll be in a more logical order. And I can print from there. I would recommend, if you're going to do labels, to print perhaps the first page of labels once you have them set up, and just print them on a regular sheet of paper, and then hold that up with your actual label sheet and just make sure the information aligns correctly on the label sheet. So give it a trial run first. When you click print here, you can select to just do that first page, print it out, make sure things are going to fit on your label sheets and, make adjustments if necessary. So let's now do a label that would be a mailing label and just talk about, some of the things you need to consider with that, and then we'll look at some of the features you can use in the filtering area. So I'll select labels again, and these will be address labels. And I'll go into my data items, and this time I might want on my first line to add text that says to the parent, guardian of. And then perhaps on the second line I want the student name. Now let's do first name first, just for something different. And then on the next line I can start adding the contact information. Now, the contact information in Precision Report Writer is available to you in two different ways. There are the separate data items, such as, contact address line 1, address line 2, and you could certainly pull the information onto the label that way. But for something like a label, I'd suggest using the combined data items that are available to you in Precision Report Writer. If I scroll down a bit, a giveaway for you that this is a combined field that's only available in PRW is when you see data items that have both uppercase and lowercase letters. All these data items that are all capital letters are typically the standard data items in MMS. The ones that have the mixed case are ones that are available only in Precision Report Writer. And you can see here that I have access to things like the contact name all combined, the first and last name combined, as opposed to having to choose the contact's first name and the contact's last name as separate data items. I also have a combined street field, and this will give me the street number and the street name. So I want these mailing labels for contact 1 for my students, so I'll select the street and double click on that. I'll come down to the next line, and you might have noticed that there was an option up here for a combined, it says contact city state. That will include the zip for us as well, so I'll select that for the next line. And again, this little preview up here at the above the label layout will show you the information, and you can see that when I choose address, it's going to give me the number and the street name, and that the city-state field includes city, state, and zip. So I'll click OK and preview these. Okay, and we can see the information there. Now, a few options for you to consider. In the last label example, we came into sort and group and we sorted on the student names. You might decide that if this is a mailing label that you're going to print frequently, that you might be more likely to print these out by homeroom than by an alphabetical order. And you'll know best based on your needs and how you typically need information like the mailing labels, what you might want to order these by. Well, what's interesting in the sort and group area is you certainly can sort based on the information you're including in the label or any report, but you can also sort on information that's not included on the label itself. And you'll notice that down here we have the option to display all of the data items, not just the ones that we've included on the request. So if I change that to all, I could come in here and say that I want to sort this information based on homeroom. And then perhaps from that, I would want to sort the information by the student's last name. So let's take a look at that now. And so I have the students in alphabetical order within their different homerooms. Now, an additional feature that's also very useful is in the sort and group area. Let me see if it'll let me group on won't let me group on the homeroom. So we'll look at a feature in the sort and group area that lets you start things on a different, well, no, let me do that now. I'm going to go back to the data items because I want to show you a feature that's usually particularly useful in the labels. And I'm actually going to include homeroom on the labels. I'm going to select the homeroom item. I'll put that after the student name. Let's do that. So here's the student name. I'll add some spaces, and then I'll add the homeroom option. Okay. Well, it's still not going to let me do groups there, so we'll ungroup that. I'll show you the feature that lets you group on something and then start a new page on each of those on a different request. Okay, so we have the students ordered by homeroom, and alphabetically within that, we can go to the filter area and add a filter that would give you the option every time you run the labels to select which homeroom you want to print. So I'll select homeroom and simply check off Ask at Runtime and click OK. And if I preview this, I could say I only want to print labels for homeroom 101, and then I only get the students in homeroom 101. Okay. So the labels are pretty straightforward, and as I said, you can use them for straightforward mailing labels, or you can use the option that would just allow you to pick a couple pieces of information about each student that you might need for a folder label or something like that. It just gives you more flexibility than the standard mailing labels report that we have available in the main MMS. So you have all of the different data items available to you, and you can organize them however you would like. Okay, the next type of request we're going to look at is the crosstab request. So as I create a new request, I'll select crosstab there, and as you can see based on the example we're given there, a crosstab is going to compare two or more pieces of data or information for us. So I'll click OK. And you can see that the setup here is very different from the other types of requests we've generated. So I'm going to call this my crosstab. In this case, my calculation method is going to be a count because in this first example, I'm interested in my ethnic counts by year of grad. And because the information is going to be displayed kind of in a grid for me, I only select two data items here. And these are the two pieces of information that I want compared against each other. So here, for the different rows, I want those to be the different ethnic designations. And when I select ethnic, what I'm going to see in each row is one of the ethnic codes that I assign. I want each column to represent the student's year of grad, so I'll select year of grad from the EMF or student master table, and I'll see the years of grad populate in there. If I preview at this point, my result is this. I'm going to have my different ethnic codes listed at the beginning of each row, and then I'll see the counts for each year of grad. Now, especially in the crosstab report, when you're only choosing 2 pieces of data, it's very important to make sure that your filter is set correctly. In most of the other requests that we've done, I've either selected data items from more than one table, or I've selected some of those combined data items like the last, first, middle name. And when I select items either from more than one table or from that MMS Filt table that the combined student name comes from, the report I run pays attention to the MMS filter I have selected. So in this case, it's been showing me all my active students. Well, with this crosstab example that I'm doing, I'm only selecting items from the student master table. And so the counts that I'm seeing include both active and inactive students. So what I want to do in this case is set up a filter that will include only my active students in the totals that get generated. So I'll come to the filter button and add a criteria. And anytime you need to indicate that you just want active MMS students, you choose the data item EMF_flag, and we want the value to be a capital A for active. And if I preview this now, my counts will probably be different than they were before because I'm excluding any of the inactive students in my school. So just remember, especially with a crosstab report, again, because you're only selecting 2 data items, that you want to make sure your filter is set up to include just the students you intend to in those counts. You'll also notice that because we're doing a crosstab report, which has a very different structure to it, I don't have an option to do a sort and group. That's kind of a moot point, a feature I don't need in this type of report. An option I do have, though, is to include row summaries or totals and column summaries or totals for the information I've selected. So if I check off those and click Preview, what you'll notice is at the bottom of each column I have a total. Now in this case, the total would represent how many students I have in that year of grad. The row total or summary is actually displayed here. I know I tend to always want to look for it on the far right-hand side, but after your list of different ethnic codes, we'll see a count, and what this count represents is how many students from all of your years of grad combined are that particular ethnicity. And then I have a final total here. So you can include totals for the columns and totals for each row. So that's a pretty straightforward crosstab request. I'm going to create another one because I just wanted to make you aware of some combined fields that are available to you when you're in with the crosstabs. So I'll create another crosstab report. This one will be actually attendance. And what I'm going to do here is compare the attendance codes that students have been assigned to their grade levels. So I'll select the attendance codes for each row. And remember, the attendance code field is SAF_code. And then here for each column is where I'll choose the grade level. And let me preview that. So here are the attendance codes that have been assigned to students, and here's how many students in each grade level have received, or how many times that code has been assigned to students in that grade level. I'm going to go to the filter and add the criteria to find just students who are active. So I'll do EMF flag equals active or capital A. And I'm also going to add a criteria that lets me do a specific date range. When you include attendance information in a request, be it a crosstab like we're working in now or a summary request like we did earlier, you can filter on a date range and get totals just for the attendance that was assigned during that date range. Now the field that I want to choose for that is SAF underscore date 1. And if I want to include a date range under relationship, I would choose the option for between. When I choose between, you can see under the value that it lets me enter 2 dates, my starting date and my ending date. And the request will give you information for that date range, including the 2 dates that you enter. So it will be inclusive of those 2 dates. Let me see if I get any results with entering the first day of September through first day of October. So I'll enter that and click OK, and we'll preview that. Okay, so I still have numbers, but as you can see, greatly reduced numbers because I've limited my date range. Remember, you can also go into the filter and you can edit the option for the date range by saying you want it to ask at runtime so that you can enter the date range whenever you run the request. And the way that would work is when you click preview or run the report, you'll have this option and you need to enter the starting date and the ending date. I wonder why that's... And we'll do November. Okay, so I only had absences during that time for those particular grade levels.
All right, right now you're scheduling with your rotation on, and you should not be scheduling with rotation on.
Now I want to go back to my ethnic count crosstab, the feature I wanted to show you that would let you pull in some combined data items actually would make more sense in this particular request. When you've already created a request and you want to go back and make changes to it, you simply highlight the request from the list and you can either click on the Edit button up here in the toolbar, or you can right-click on the request name itself and choose Edit, which would bring you to the entire setup screen, or you could choose the particular aspect of that request you wanted to edit. So you can see here, because this is a summary request, I can go in and directly edit the data items or the filters and so forth. So if you select Edit, that'll bring you into the overall setup screen for that request. If you select one of the specific features to work on, it will bring you to that part of the setup process. So for this crosstab report that included the ethnic counts, I'm going to edit that. And I wanted to show you one of these combined fields, because if you wanted to break down the information further and you're interested not only in your ethnic counts by year of grad but also by gender, there are some combined data items available to you in Precision Report Writer. So if I come to the drop down where I have year of grad, you'll notice that one of my options is year of grad and ethnic combined. I also, I believe it's under gender.
Yeah, and go to the rating. Go to the scheduling tab. Yeah, and on the lower right-hand corner, they're going to see...
Here it is. Under gender, I have a combined gender and ethnicity. So if I wanted to as I said, break down the information further, I could come over here and select my combined gender and ethnicity. Now when I preview this, let me take off these summaries for a minute. When I preview this, again, the information is broken down further, so it's still going to give me counts for each year of grad. However, I'll have a count for females who have different ethnic designations and males who have different ethnic designations. So here's how many females have an ethnic code of 3 in each grade level or year of grad, and here's how many males have an ethnic code of 3 in each year of grad. So it simply breaks the information down further for you, kind of similar to what we saw in that first summary request I created, just displayed in a different way. So just remember that you have access, again, to some of those combined fields that are only available in Precision Report Writer. Just to give you a look at those combined data items, just so you're aware of what they are. I'm just going to go into one of the reports I've already created, and I'm going to go into my data items, not for the purpose of changing anything, but I'm going to put the data items in order by table name, and I want to show you the different items that are available in that MMS Filt table, because those items are only available in the report writer. Okay. So all of these items that we see for MMS Filt you can use when you're in PRW. If you simply want to display the age of a student without having to do any calculations, you can select that. It has options to do counts of males and females, their ID position, their ID number, the primary sibling flag. If you use family IDs in MMS, you have a primary sibling, and this primary sibling flag would be indicating whether or not the student is the primary sibling or not. School year and school code, the combined gender and ethnicity and year of grad and ethnicity, and the starting school year, as you can see here, the 4-character year indicating the starting school year. So those are the features from that MMS Filt table that are available to you that are sometimes nice to use just because they combine information you might want to use already. Now, having looked at those other 3 types of requests, the summary, the crosstab, and the label, what I wanted to show you next is how you can export and import entire report setups to and from Precision Report Writer. And the reason this is helpful is because sometimes districts are set up so that each school has their own separate report writer. So if I'm a secretary in the elementary school, when I go into Precision Report Writer, I don't have access to the high school's reports from the report writer. And if I create something that secretaries at the high school would like to use, I can export the entire setup of that report, send it to my colleague over at the high school, and they'd be able to import that into PRW and save the time of setting that up from scratch. So one of the ways you use the import and export feature is if you need to send a report set up to someone else and they need to bring it into Report Writer. Another way that this is used is you might discover that one of the attendance examples that you use a lot, someone went in and changed and it no longer works, and we could, from here in the support department, send you a new setup for that report, and you could import it in and use it. So, sometimes you might receive report setups from us for whatever reason, and knowing how to import them into your report writer is a helpful tool. So let me show you first how you would export a request setup from Report Writer, and that simply is by going to the File menu and Export. Now remember here we're exporting a report setup. We're not exporting data into Excel like we looked at in the first PRW webinar. What we see when we come in here is an alphabetical listing of the different requests or reports that are set up in PRW. So I'm going to use my homeroom list that I created in the first webinar, and I'm going to export that. So I'll select homeroom list from this list of requests and simply double click on it. If I had other reports I wanted to export, I could double click on them to compile a list here, and then I simply click on export. And what I get next is basically a save as screen. So I'd indicate where I wanted to save this, and the name that the export file is given is an RQ to represent request and then actually today's date. So I could leave it like that, or I could indicate that this is my homeroom list, and I'd simply click on save. Now this, let me see here if I can get there. Let me go to my desktop. Here's my homeroom list file that contains the setup for this report. So that I can show you an example of how you would import a request, I'm actually going to come in here and delete that homeroom list from Precision Report Writer so that as far as PRW is concerned, that report doesn't exist in my report writer. And I'm going to come to File, and this time I'm going to import. Up at the top of this screen, I'll click on the ellipsis button so I can indicate where this file is saved. And in this case, it's on my desktop, and it's the homeroom list file. So I'll say OK. Once I've designated the file that I want to bring in, PRW recognizes it as a report that was created on April 11th. So I'll double click on that to bring it down here to tell the system this is what I want you to import, and I'll simply click on import. I get the message that one request was imported. And if I come to my request root folder, now I'll see that that homeroom list is available to me. I can move that back to my webinar folder simply by right-clicking on it and going to Move Request and selecting the webinar folder. And now I have that same, grade level, that same report available to me. All right, now since we have some time, what I'd like to do is show you just two more features. I want to show you a feature that allows us to copy report setups so that we have multiple copies to work with, and I wanted to show you that feature I alluded to earlier where you can group on something like homeroom and then tell the system that you want to print each homeroom on a new page. So I'll show you those two features since we have a bit of time to do that. The first of those two features I wanted to show you was the option you have to copy any of the report setups that you have in PRW, and I'll show you that in two different instances. Okay. I'm going to come to one of the examples we have in PRW, one of those reports that's preloaded into the system. I've already talked about how it's helpful to make use of these reports if they contain information that you need, but sometimes if one of these examples contains information you need, you might still want to modify it a bit to suit your specific needs. I'm a huge fan, if you're going to modify something, to keep a copy of the original so that if you experiment a little bit with the modification and things don't go as planned, you can always go back to square one. And you're able to do that with any of the requests that are in Precision Report Writer, be they examples that came with the system or requests that you yourself have created. So I'm going to come into this Enhanced Section Enrollment report and simply click on Edit. Now, if this is a report that's useful to you but you want to play around with modifying it a bit, again, I'd really recommend copying the report so you have an original that you can always go back to. And copying a report is as simple as selecting to edit it and using this Save As button. Works just like Microsoft Word does. When you click on Save As, what you'll want to do is give this a slightly different name than the original request. So I'm going to change this so it says SEC_PRT, and I'm going to change the next letter to an O. And then I'm going to adjust the description to say this is the original. I'm going to leave it set to make a copy, and I'm going to click OK. Now if I close out of this, now you'll see that I have the original report, well, the one that I made a copy of, the Enhanced Section Enrollment for grades 6 through 12, and I also have my original. What I can then do is keep this original in place and come into this Enhanced Section listing for grades 6 through 12 and make my modifications. And the advantage here again is that if I make modifications that change the report beyond all recognition, I can go back to my original and still be able to run that. So being able to make copies of these requests, I think, is a huge advantage because it just gives you added flexibility. You can create a copy of the report and then in the copy try different things out, but you always have something to go back to. So if I come to my webinar folder and open up my homeroom list, I can save a copy of that. Again, you have to give it a slightly different name and click OK. And now I have two homeroom lists, a copy that I can go back to if the changes I'm about to make don't work out as I intended, and another version of that that I can play around with. So the Save As feature is great. And if you're doing a very complex report, I've been known to make multiple copies. So what I'll do is I'll create a report and maybe I'll get the basics in place, the data items, the filter, the grouping, and so forth. And I'll make a copy of that. And then before I venture into changing the format of that report, I'll make a copy. I might have the format in an acceptable state, and before I try something different or something I haven't done before, I'll copy the report again. So there are times when I'm working on a request where I might have 4 different copies of the request because I want to make sure that I kind of save it at each stage of the process so that I can always go back to a prior version if necessary. So with a copy safely in place, I can go into a request and make changes to it, knowing that I have the original to go back to. So I'm going to go into this homeroom list, and the other feature I wanted to show you today, in addition to the handy Save As feature, was an option you have in the sort and group area. Now this report simply lists homerooms, the students in the homeroom, their birthday and gender. And I have an Ask It Runtime filter that asks me what grade level I'm interested in seeing. So I'm currently looking at 10th graders. In the sort and group area, I already have the students grouped by homeroom so that when I look at the report, they're separated out by homeroom. I wanted to show you a feature that's available in the grouping area. So I'm going to come down here to Options. And in the Options area, when you have the report grouped on something, you have options for calculations and you have options for formatting. For calculations, you'll see again these different computation buttons available to you based on the information you're including in the report. So because I'm grouping on homeroom and I'm not, I don't have things like the number of days the student was present or absent, the only calculation available to me here is to do a count. So I'm going to select count. It gives me a count of records in group. Let me click OK and show you what that does. So you can see what I now have at the bottom of each homeroom list is a total of how many students who are 10th graders are in that homeroom. We saw earlier in the summary request that we can also get a count for each group, but it was a quicker process to get that. So here, if I'm doing a basic detail request, I have to go into sort and group on a data item, go to options, and under calculations, select count. Under the formatting options, probably the most commonly used feature here is the fact that you can start a new page with each new group. So if I double click on new page and say OK, what the system will do is every time a new homeroom appears, it will print on a new page. So here's homeroom 101, and you'll notice I have to go to the next page to see homeroom 102, and so forth. So a quick and easy way when you're creating a report, if you want information to be on different pages or to start on a new page, you can easily take care of that in the sort and group area. You simply group on the piece of information that you want to cause a new page to be printed, and you'll go to options and under formatting, select new page. Okay. So saving copies of reports will be useful to you, especially as you venture into creating more complex requests in the Precision Report Writer, and the sort and group area giving you the ability to do a count of the records in a certain group and also select the option to start a new page for each new group that's included in your report. And then one last thing I'd like to show you that's kind of a preview of one of the things we'll be looking at in Precision Report Writer 3 has to do with formatting the reports. Now on a very basic level, as we look at the preview of this report, what you've probably noticed is the left-hand side is right up against the edge of the paper. So what I'd like to show you is how you can modify that format, move everything over to the right, and then in the Precision Report Writer 3 webinar, we'll be looking more at how you can modify the layout of your reports and change the look of the reports, as well as some advanced features in terms of doing calculations and variables in your reports. So just a sneak peek at the layout modification process we're going to look at in more depth in Precision Report Writer 3. And all I'm going to focus on at this point is moving everything on the report further over to the right so I have more of a left-hand margin. Now anytime you're going to edit the layout of a report, in this case I usually edit the layout after I've previewed the report and notice something I want to change about the layout. So I'm going to close out of the preview, and you'll notice I have an Edit Layout button here. That's going to take me into the area where I can adjust the layout. The other way that you can get to editing the layout is if you're here in the setup screen, the request editor, you can click on Output and Edit. Okay, let me close out of there. Okay, so let's preview the report. This is the process I usually use. I preview the report. I notice something like the fact that I have 0 left-hand margin. I close out of the preview and I select Edit Layout. Now, in the next webinar, I'll talk in greater detail about what each of these different areas of this screen is and what it controls, but all I want to do at this point is show you how we can move all of this information over to the right and actually get a left-hand margin. What you're seeing here is the behind-the-scenes formatting of the report, and there are a lot of options available to you, so we'll just focus on one right now. Basically, everything you see here represents a piece of information on the report, from the column headings to the specific data that's being displayed and so forth. All I'm going to do here is come up to the Edit menu and choose Select All. What that does, just like in Word, everything on the page, everything that's included in the report is selected, and with it all selected, I'm simply going to hit the right arrow key to move everything over. And this might be a matter of trial and error. You know, you might decide, oh, I moved it too far, or I didn't move it enough. Okay, so I moved the items over, and then I'm just going to close out by clicking on the X in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll be prompted to either save the changes or not. So I'll save my changes, and then the preview I get shows me the result of those changes. So you can see I now have a margin on the left-hand side that's applied throughout the report, and I'll just make one more change. I currently have no top margin, so I'll just do that same process over again and just move everything down a bit. So I'm going to close out and go to Edit Layout, and actually here, let me select all and just move everything down a little bit. And we'll close out of that. Okay, so now everything's moved down just a tiny bit, and I have a left-hand margin, so things look a little better on each page. So that's just a sneak peek at what we'll be looking at in the next webinar when we look at how you can edit the layout of those reports further, you know, including changing the font and so forth, moving information around so it appears in different places. And as I said, we're also going to look at some more advanced features, such as how you can do additional calculations in the reports and create variables to just give you a greater degree of flexibility in what information you include on the requests themselves. But hopefully this was a good overview for you for how you can create summary requests and different types of labels and crosstab reports, as well as importing and exporting entire report setups from the Precision Report Writer.